welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I made my Magenta cosplay. For the base of this outfit, I used a hot pink Aeropostale puffer vest that's been sitting in my closet for 10 years and still had the tags on. I was basing this design off of a jacket that I made a few years ago, which means that I had to knit the sleeves. For this particular project, I used just the sleeves portion of the penguin holiday sweater pattern by Yarnspiration, and I will put a link to the pattern in the description. And this is where I realized I read the pattern wrong and had to start completely over. But once I read through the pattern and realized where I went wrong, it actually was relatively smooth sailing after that. I say relatively because I gave up knitting a few years ago when my hypermobility made it really hard for me to knit without dislocating joints, but I took my time with it. It was fine. Or I should say, it was fine, because we did run into another problem. I finished knitting this sleeve and I realized there wasn't quite enough yarn left for another sleeve. However, okay, I got worried with this sweater because I just finished one sleeve and this is all the yarn I had left, which I wasn't sure would be enough for another sleeve, but it turns out we had more of this yarn. Shout out to Zoe for telling me that we had more. This is gonna be way more than enough. I'm very excited. So with that crisis averted, I just repeated every step that I did before, minus the parts where I made a bunch of mistakes. I was con crunching a little, and this did take many hours over the span of a couple of days, but I did get everything done in time. Now that I'm done with the knitting portion, it's time to move on to the sewing portion. To make my life a little bit easier, I put my vest onto a dress form, and then I started pinning the sleeves where I wanted them to go. Now that I know where the sleeves are supposed to be, I started hand stitching them onto the vest. I just connected these pieces with a very simple whip stitch, and with the sleeve placement, this jacket will look layered. Now I'm going to sew the seams on the knitted portion, which I didn't do earlier, and I'm not entirely certain why. This just made more sense in my head. And once again, I'm going to repeat that entire process on the other side of the jacket. I was going to iron on this absolutely adorable blue and magenta applique that I found on Amazon, but I ran into a problem.
Huh?
It's not sticking. Is this not an iron-on? I'm going to sew this. I thought I was done with hand sewing for this project, but I was wrong. Since the puffer vest is pretty thick, I tried my best to only sew through the top layer of fabric, and I succeeded. And now it's time to move on to the ears. I sketched the shape I wanted onto a piece of scrap paper and just cut it out, and then I transferred that pattern to a sheet of bubblegum pink felt. To get the look I wanted, I needed to cut out 4 pieces. And on the topic of getting the look that I wanted, I grabbed some fuchsia felt and cut out 4 polka dots. This is what things were starting to look like. The next step was simply just sewing those polka dots in place. I needed something to anchor the ears to the headband, so I grabbed some scrap felt and just sewed it in place so I knew exactly how big I needed those loops to be. Then I put the right sides together and started sewing the piece inside out. I attached one of those anchors, I flipped the piece so the right sides are facing outwards, and I needed a little bit of help from my scissors to get this piece to flip correctly, and I sewed the piece shut. And then you know the drill, I repeated that entire process for the second ear. Then I just slid those pieces onto the headband and that was it! And I can honestly say that this cosplay was approved by Steve, Joe, and even Josh. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more of my shenanigans. Bye!